Last year, I taught seventh grade US history, and one of the unique positions that I'm in with my students is I've had the same students since sixth grade. So I taught them sixth grade social studies. Last year, I taught them seventh grade Texas history, and currently, I'm teaching them eighth grade US history. They're my babies. I love them. We've been through a lot together. One of the biggest aspirations that I had for them last year was for them to develop an intrinsic motivation to do well in school. I found that coming into middle school, they typically did their work according to the subject that they found to be their favorite or the teacher that they had the strongest connection with. However, I wanted to transform that from being about doing the work for someone else or something that they favored and do it for them and themselves. So, one of the ways that I tried to accomplish this was by having a character trait, grit, be something that we focused on all year. And one of the ways we did that was we might have a free write day about grit, or we would have warm ups where I would present different situations, real life scenarios to them, and they would explain to me or to the class, or we'd have a discussion where we would ask ourselves, did this individual display grit? And if not, what could they have done to do so? The way I would classify this as being successful was through different pieces of evidence that I saw throughout the year. So one of them might be if I saw a student not working and I would go over to have a private conversation with them, one of the first things they would talk to me about before I would even say anything to them was, Miss Howard, I know I need to display grit in this situation, or I'm trying to show you that I have grit and that I want to use it in this situation, but I'm really frustrated and I just don't know what to do. And the fact that they were even thinking about the character trait grit knew and told me that they had a sense of accomplishment and that me expressing this character trait to them and having them start to internalize it was working. Another piece of evidence that this was successful was teachers would come up to me, whether it be in our team meetings or our grade level meetings, and they would say, Miss Howard, I heard two students talking in the hallway about how challenging your homework was. But I heard a student also mention, well, at least you showed grit by like getting through it and doing it anyway and like putting an effort through. And the fact that they were verbally starting to use the term in the correct manner and like encourage each other showed me that this had been a success. One of the other big aspirations that I had for my students to pair with this intrinsic motivation was teamwork. I felt as though since sixth grade they had not really been um, as kind as they could have to each other coming into middle school. Middle school is a very awkward stage. So the summer before, I had been a SOM, and so coming into my second year of teaching, I wanted to change things up. So I created the same team shout out board that I had at Institute. I put one in my classroom. And it worked phenomenally. And the way it did it was every Wednesday I gave each class period a sticky note where they could give each other a compliment. They had to either write down a fellow student, a teacher, or an administrator who had demonstrated teamwork in some capacity. And 9 times out of 10, it was a student, which is what I aimed for. But we also got the teachers. And students would rush at the end of the class period to see if their name had been posted on the board. And it was something that they truly began to value and see value in. It allowed people to say, well, Miss Howard, I really want to get my name on the teamwork board, and I feel like I'm showing teamwork, but I'm not getting recognition for it. Which came to the idea of, well, everything that we do in life doesn't always yield recognition. You do it for the right reasons because it's the right thing to do. And so it really opened up a whole discussion of character building that I never really saw coming, but that I was very proud of and saw evidence of success in. It also showed evidence of success with faculty members. So I would take the sticky notes that I got on the board, and if it mentioned a teacher, I would drop in that teacher's box, or I would drop it in that administrator's box so that they too could feel rejuvenated in their spirit about what it was like, and that remembering that we are a team at this school and that we're a team in this community and that we're a team, especially in the classroom, and trying to get each other where we need to go and holding each other accountable. Another important aspiration that I am had strived for last year in teaching was this a quote that you never let your circumstances dictate what you become in life. And in sixth grade, I had meaningful conversations, I would say, with my students about what it meant to be a minority and what their background and their experiences to the table, how that could add value to their education, but how that also was a way for them to, and a means for them to work harder. But we didn't really dive into what that meant. We didn't dive into what it meant to be a part of the East Side community of San Antonio. We didn't dive in what it meant to be really like low income community, what advantages and disadvantages that it may have had. And so I brought that into the curriculum. I brought that into my classroom last year a lot, right? And it was always this idea of like, don't let your circumstances dictate who you become in life. Like, your zip code doesn't define who and what you will be. And my students started to pick up on that. They started to pick up on the idea. We would have conversations about how technically you couldn't be failed. You couldn't, a teacher couldn't give you below a 70, but in actuality, if you received a 70, then you were borderline not like academically prepared for what you needed to be. And that opened up a world to my students of saying, well, one, I don't ever want to be near a 70, even if it's a C or passing. To me, that's saying that I'm really not on par with where I need to be academically. And two, I want people to be honest with me about my situation, my circumstances, and what I need to do to achieve greatness despite what I'm going through. So it was really great to see my students start to become advocate for themselves, which paired with that idea of intrinsic motivation, right? This idea that I have to do well in school, I need to do well for me, because whatever I want to become in life, I need to make sure that I have what I need, and that more importantly, that I can encourage myself to do well in school. Right. And I think that that was wonderful. I think they started advocating, like, we haven't gotten homework in a week. Like, I need extra practice. Right. And I saw this starting to develop in them. And I saw that as a sign of success. Um, One of the biggest measurable goals that I had for my seventh grade students last year was to achieve 80% mastery on all TEKS. And by the end of the school year, 80% of students had achieved 80% mastery on all TEKS. However, we were in a unique position where they were also being tested in seventh grade writing and seventh grade reading. So within their ELA class, they had two tests to take. And I paired up with the ELA teacher. She was a first year teacher. I paired up with her, and I incorporated ELA curriculum into social studies for the first time. I hadn't done that in sixth grade, so it was a new learning experience for me. But what it did was it caused my measurable goals to change as well. So not only did I want 80% mastery on all TEKS for all my students, but I also wanted them to improve their Lexile or reading score by one grade level, because a lot of them are 2 to 3 grade levels behind. And I also wanted to see an increase on their writing test. So I wanted at least 50% of my students to pass their writing test. And especially because their writing skills were a little bit lower. They hadn't been tested since fourth grade on writing. And a lot of the other curriculum they experienced in fifth and sixth grade didn't cause them to write as much. So we dealt with those three goals. And as I said, by the end of the year, once we got to measuring their progress, about 80% of students had been able to achieve at their end of the year test 80% mastery on all TEKS. And they finished with 54% of students passed their writing test, which was huge. They were fifth in the district, which, although when I looked at it and I assessed it and I said, oh, I'd have liked for a higher percentage of my students to get passing, I was happy with the 54% because I wanted 50% of students to pass that writing test. And that was really well for them. And even if they didn't pass, 100% of students showed progress, which was huge for us. When the ELA and our teacher and myself looked at the writing scores from beginning to now, 100% of students had showed progress. And that made me extremely happy because it made me feel confident in their ability to not only learn, to want to learn, to demonstrate that learning, and that they can only go up from here. As far as our Lexile score is concerned, there were 40% of students achieved at least one Lexile score higher than their average reading level. To me, this was huge because I knew going into 8th grade, the STAR test for U.S. history is on a 12th grade reading level. So to imagine that the reading level of that test is already 4 grade levels behind if they were on target with their reading level. But then to think that they were 2 to 3 behind, I knew that they had to be pushed to at least be on grade level in order to try and be successful on that test that they had coming up in social studies next year. So I decided those goals based on, one, the curriculum of social studies that I had to teach, Two, I based it off of the ELA curriculum, knowing that my students had an ELA test to take in reading and an ELA test to take in writing, especially considering they hadn't had writing since fourth grade. So I determined those measurable goals based on the information that I had for ELA curriculum and social studies curriculum. I would say that the one thing I could have done to improve my teaching goals last year was to one, start to embed writing a lot sooner in the social studies curriculum. I waited about 2 months in, so we really didn't start diving deep into writing until about mid October, and I should have been doing that more often and a lot sooner ahead of time. I feel like that would have given students a better practice of nothing more than stamina of writing. And it would have given them the opportunity to get feedback on their writing from more than just one teacher. I could have also embedded a lot more of their own personal experiences and background into the curriculum to make it more interesting to them. So, for instance, there were times in the curriculum in social studies where we talked about what did it mean to be an indentured servant, or what did it mean to be classified as less than, or what type of internal strength did you need to have to overcome the idea that the world or the society was looking at you as like a second class citizen or as something as unfortunately as degrading as property. And I didn't take the time to dig into that a lot more, seeing that 100% of my students are minorities. And I wish I had. That's something else I could have done to improve my teaching last year. And I also think that if I had allowed them to have more free response writings on that, on topics that they were passionate about, not only could it have improved their writing skills, it could have invested them in writing more, could have invested them in the social studies content period more, and potentially reached out and got a higher percent of students passing the writing test had I helped the ELA teacher a lot sooner in getting our students